Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight for Empowering Tools for the Millennial Homebuyer with Price & Co. Real Estate. My name is Gertie Harris, and I'm the founder of Fireside at 5. We're a community-driven programming and activation collective that works with local organizations and companies to educate, inspire, and mobilize through in-person and virtual events. Tonight, we have our first Fireside panel of 2021, which will highlight best practices for first-time home buyers who are looking to grow their real estate portfolios in the new year. The Price & Co. Real Estate team will also be sharing industry trends and answering questions from viewers that are watching at home. Our chats are meant to be collaborative, solution-driven, and engaging. So we would love for anyone that is watching at home to get involved in the discussion by commenting or asking questions through the chat feature on Facebook or YouTube. We will try our best to get to everyone. Lastly, I'd like to give a special thanks to all of our panelists who are joining us tonight and the Price & Co. Real Estate team for sharing their extensive real estate knowledge with the community. Thank you again for tuning in tonight, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce our facilitator for this evening, Peter Hurd, Broker Associate with Price & Co. Real Estate. Peter?
Thank you, Gertie. Thank you to everyone for joining us and to our panelists. I don't want to waste too much time, so I just want to jump right into introductions. I want to get us started with Andrea Price. She's the owner of Price & Co., and she can tell you a little bit more about herself.
My name is Andrea Price, Valenzuela. I have been in real estate now, hard to believe, but going on over 10 years. I started in real estate under my dad. He is actually the true owner of the company I've taken over just in recent years. But I've been in real estate really since I could walk and talk. I absolutely love working with first-time home buyers and ironically equestrians, because I am one. So those are my two major passions within real estate. We have awesome agents, and so I will pass it over to Matt.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. And good evening, everybody. Like Andrea said, my name is Matt Allen, and I work alongside Andrea and Peter at Price & Co. as well. So I'm an associate broker, but I'm also the executive director at Price & Co. So I have a little bit more day-to-day operations where I help Andrea kind of run the business with things. I've been in real estate for over 5 years now. I didn't start my career in real estate as a lot of agents tend to do. I started in tech and then just kind of through my love of real estate and doing it part-time, and then kind of going back to school and getting a degree in real estate, I decided to kind of move for a full-time career. So been working mainly in the residential sector. I've done a couple commercial deals, but residential is kind of where I make my living. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mike.
Thanks, y'all. I'm Mike Stone. I'm a licensed loan officer with a mortgage bank here in Denver called Megastar Financial. And so by licensed loan officer, basically, I'm a residential mortgage advisor. I've been in the business now almost 9 years. This is my first job out of college. It's all been with Megastar Financial. And I guess I'm really passionate about what I do. Not only has it become my career, but it's a deep passion of mine, because unfortunately, I guess what I've witnessed is that the mortgage industry tends to underserve consumers. And I guess what I mean by that is that I think there's just a lot of mortgage professionals who kind of mail it in. And this is part of my excitement here today is just being able to kind of be on the front lines of educating clients, because I think that is lacking quite a bit in the mortgage and banking industry, so that people really know what they're getting into before they take on a 30-year mortgage and buy, a few $100,000 home. So anyway, I appreciate everyone for joining and appreciate the Price & Co. team for having me.
Thank you, Mike. A little introduction to myself. I am a University of Denver graduate along with Gertie. I have been in Denver for 7 or 8 years, and I got my start in commercial real estate right out of college and just transitioned to residential in the last year with Price & Co. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity to be working with Matt and Andrea and learn from them. So I just wanted to launch right in and start us off with some discussion questions. And I'm going to direct this one to Andrea first and just ask you, what are the advantages of buying over renting, especially in a city like Denver that has so much growth?
Sure. So we all have to live somewhere. Most of the time, especially in the millennial generation, we're renting, which usually means you're putting money in your landlord's pocket instead of in your own future. In an area like Denver, property values are strong. They will continue to be strong over the next foreseeable future, really. So it's really not a bad investment. If you're going to have to pay to live somewhere, you might as well invest in yourself. The other big piece of things that COVID has really highlighted for a lot of people that are renting is if you're going to be stuck in quarantine somewhere, it's really fun to be stuck in quarantine in your own home. You can do your own home improvement projects. You can make a garden. You can paint your walls whatever color you want. And so you're really able to have a lot more ownership, no pun intended there, but ownership over your future and your existing, where you live and what you do with your home. So Denver is a great place to invest. Really, we have clients that will sometimes buy something, live in it a year and a half, turn around and sell it. You can't lose. It's not always going to be like that, but if you have to live somewhere and pay money, you might as well pay yourself.
Absolutely. And it doesn't hurt to have room for all those dogs, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Matt, what's your opinion on the matter?
Yeah, I mean, to touch on what Andrea said, I think, you don't have to be in real estate or even in business just to know that buying versus renting is always going to yield you a better result. Yes, there's risk in kind of any investment, but real estate historically is one of the least riskiest investments there is. So when you kind of look at some of the peaks and valleys over the years, real estate really doesn't have like the same peaks and valleys that you see in like the stock market. So if you're going to park your money into some sort of investment, real estate's a pretty safe bet. I mean, on top of that, you can get it insured. You can insure a stock. You also can't walk into a bank and put 20% down and then they give you a bunch of money to buy Tesla stock, but you can do that for real estate. So for somebody that's looking to build out their portfolio, diversify off of their 401ks and the ROAs and kind of the traditional income paths, real estate's a great way to do that because you don't need to have 100% of the money up front. You can leverage up with a bank and then, you can pay it off over time and build equity. And then, even if you have a 30-year mortgage, it doesn't mean you have to stay there after 30 years. You can stay there for a couple years. And as we've seen with Denver and people that are from around here, you guys know the prices always continue to appreciate, even in down times and weird times like COVID. You're going to get an ROI that's going to be pretty fruitful. So, start early, as the kind of old saying in real estate. Don't wait to buy good property, buy good real estate and wait. And that really can't be truer. So we understand that there's a lot that goes on in buying your first home, and the biggest hurdle is typically the down payment. But what we're trying to do with this session is kind of educate people, of kind of informing them on the process and letting them know that it's maybe not what you think, and it's not as hard of a barrier of entry. And once you just kind of get the snowball rolling, you kind of blink your eye and 5 years goes by and you're pretty happy that you made that investment.
Mike, do you have anything to add?
I do. Yeah. I mean, those are all good points, Matt and Andrea. And I think that I hear a lot of that from clients. And just to reiterate, I guess my belief, but also what I hear most out in the marketplace is that, in compared to renting, people want to be able to build equity. They want their money going towards something that they'll be able to recoup in the future, as opposed to lining the pockets of their landlord or, a big apartment conglomerate. I think another thing is that, rents can increase over time. And so being able to lock in a fixed rate on the mortgage and a fixed payment is very appealing to people. And I think there's the question of flexibility comes up a lot of times. And I think a lot of people do rent because they feel like there's more flexibility and, hey, there's only a year-long commitment. And I would tend to play devil's advocate that I almost think there's more flexibility when it comes to owning, because you can, if you want to go and travel, you can up and leave, retain your home, rent it out to someone, and you can be that landlord that then collects the cash flow and has this other person build you equity and build you wealth. So I think there's certainly a lot of benefits. It's not necessarily right for everyone, and I've heard of some people who just get absolute killer deals in renting as well. So I think it's just an equation of looking at the numbers and what makes the most sense for someone with their goals and where they're at in their life.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And honestly, this is something that I'm going to ask both Peter and Mike to kind of elaborate on. You guys mentioned equity a lot. And so for a lot of the people that are watching at home today who might not understand equity or unfamiliar with the topic, do you guys think you could kind of expand a little bit more about what it means and why that's important to build? Peter, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I think equity is a term that kind of gets thrown around in a couple of different contexts, whether in the stock market or otherwise. But in real estate, equity really refers to how much value of your home you actually own. And so when you take out a mortgage and you start making those principal payments, some of that payment is going towards your principal, and that is building up your equity and building up your net worth. And so we like to consider it kind of a built-in savings plan that as you're paying what usually is your rent and is like we said, lining your landlord's pockets, this is effectively still going back into your pocket. And as you make those payments and your home value appreciates, you're also able to get that value when you decide to either sell, or you can tap into that value in a variety of different ways, whether it be home equity, line of credit, or other ways. But I'm sure Mike can kind of explain more about those options. So I'll throw it over to him.
Yeah. Nice job, Peter. I mean, I think once again, you already touched on this, but equity is it's the difference between the home's value and your outstanding loan when it comes to real estate. So if you have a $500,000 home value and you have a $400,000 loan, you have $100,000 in equity. There are ways for that equity to grow. It could be through price appreciation and the home increasing in value from $500,000 to $550,000. And also over time, you will pay that loan balance down. And so in a number of years, that loan could be down from $400,000 to $350,000. And so with that, then at the time of selling, or at the time of looking into other financing options to get access to that equity, you can then pull out that money. So hopefully that helps with a little bit of background on what we mean by home equity.
Yeah, no, that absolutely helps. Thanks. And Peter, I think you've got this next question, right?
Yep. So we just wanted to touch on 3 things that millennial home buyers should know right now. In this current market, what is something that somebody is completely unfamiliar who wants to step in? What is something that they should know? And I think we can throw this question over to Matt.
Yep. So, 3 things right now that, speaking from a Denver perspective, I think the first thing that I want to talk on is the COVID situation, because, that's definitely kind of most pressing, and it's impacting a lot of things. And there's a lot of people out there that think that because the economy overall is in a recession and a lot of terrible things are going on where people are losing their jobs and a lot of people are on unemployment, sometimes I get asked, like, how's the real estate market doing? And I'm going, it's insanely busy right now. And they go, oh my God, how is that? Like, how does that make any sense if everything else is not doing well and nothing's even open? Well, really, there's a double-sided lever to real estate. And it's also one of the reasons, to kind of go back to what I said earlier on why it doesn't have as many peaks and valleys. And overall, it's a kind of a less risky investment than other assets. It's because there's always going to be a market for sellers or buyers. So right now in COVID, you have people that unfortunately are in distressed situations. Maybe they have a second home here in Denver or a condo in the mountains, and they just like, we want to sell this because we don't need the second home. We'd rather just have the cash or the security of selling that. And so on the flip side, you have a bunch of people that aren't in a bad spot, and they're taking advantage of the historically low interest rates. So you're bringing a lot of buyers to the table, and then there's also sellers out there that have to get rid of it. So it kind of creates this inherent market that's always going to be there. And whether it's COVID or not, there's always going to be ebbs and flows, whether it's a seller's market or a buyer's market. There's always going to be opportunity there. So I think the first thing is that because of the overall economy, it doesn't always mean that the real estate market is particularly in a bad spot. So for first-time home buyers, if you're in a good spot with your job and your standings, it's a great time for you right now. Although the inventory is a little bit low, things are moving very quickly because sellers are in a position where there's just a lot of buyers that are submitting offers. But when you find the right place, and to Mike's point earlier, to lock in a 30-year loan, well, right now we're looking at interest rates that we just haven't seen in I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years. So when you lock in a 30-year fixed, that payment that you're going to make day one is the same payment you're going to make on year 30. So just imagine 30 years of equity, 30 years of price appreciation. And if you're, I don't know, still in that place, you're not really paying a lot to be there. Or if you're renting it out, you're going to have quite a nice profit margin if you rent it out, because you're not going to owe a lot to the bank and you're going to get a lot of rent 30 years from now. So that's one thing I kind of want to touch on there. And then another thing that I want to touch on when it comes particular to Denver, it's a very safe market because it's got a lot of good things going for it, which impact real estate. So real estate is kind of a reflection of kind of how the local economy and market is doing. So when you have cities that are based on one industry or very select few industries, or it's not a desirable place to live, then those are the ones that tend to be more risky. Denver has very diverse in industry. We got oil and gas, we got tech, we got health. There's a lot of local colleges. It's also a desirable place to live. People come here to ski. It's fairly affordable compared to some other markets like LA, San Francisco, New York. And the weather is good. I mean, all those things come into play. So as we saw kind of with COVID, when oil and gas took a hit, well, guess what? We didn't crash as a market because we had all these other things holding it up. People weren't all losing their jobs at once, which then, creates a problem with the real estate market. So if you ever want to look into kind of the real estate crash in the 80s that happened in Houston, well, they're a big oil and gas town. So when oil and gas kind of took a hit, the whole real estate market flattened. So that's where, Denver's safe, and it's a good place historically to park your money because you have assurability that when things go wrong and you have the downflows, you're still going to be in a good spot.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
Does anyone, Andrea or Mike, do you guys have anything else to add, or should I toss this one to Peter?
I think you can kick it over to Peter. I would just resonate with what Matt said. I mean, I'm long-term bullish on the Denver market for all of those reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've got great demographics of people moving here. Like Matt said, a robust economy, high quality of life. And I think the other thing too is just, some geographical things on supply and demand. Like you can only build so far west and into the mountains. And, to the east, though, we do have open plains and plenty of, I guess, additional supply to build out there. But I think all of those things should lead to long-term growth. And I wouldn't say that, this last decade has been a stellar one for our market in that we've seen years of double-digit appreciation at times. You can't sustain anything like that regardless of the investment. So it's not necessarily to get into real estate to bank on like, you want to make a quick buck. But I think long-term, I think you've got a relatively safe investment that will appreciate slowly over time. And then, with the debt pay down, you'll have that equity to where you'll be able to, it'll just be a stronger net worth position than you would have been otherwise.
Absolutely. And I'll just kind of jump right off of that. I think you guys have both given really good high level Denver market summaries, but, just as somebody who's just getting into the market, I think, some of the things to keep in mind, first of all, like we've touched on, is just, understanding your own situation, understanding your own goals and your credit score. And then, from there, you can start to look to getting a mortgage. And the one piece of advice that I think we've all kind of touched on already is that debt can be scary, but it's nothing to be afraid of. It is a great tool to grow your net worth, one of the best tools there is. And so, like we've said, if you can get in early, the better you're going to do. And then, as we've touched on, is the lifestyle of Denver. We have one of the best outdoor amenities that people could ask for, and that's not going anywhere anytime soon. And so I think that is one of the biggest driving values of Denver real estate. And so I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And I think this next question is for Andrea. Peter, you got this one? Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry. I know we've kind of gotten some high-level updates from Matt and Mike, but I just wanted to hear Andrea's opinion on just how the Denver market is doing and how it's gonna proceed.
Sure. So if you listen to the news at all, Denver Post, 9 News, they all say how hot the market is. Ironically, just a couple days ago, they came out with an article saying that the market for 2021 is expected to slow a little bit. That's good. So we have an extremely consistently hot market. It's also very skewed in favor of the seller. So we have very low inventory, very high demand, which is driving up multiple offers, driving up prices. It is something that I always, when I start off with buyers that are first entering into the marketplace, I like to set that expectation because I don't want them to think they're going to go in and it's going to be, they're going to find the first house, they're going to love it, it's going to be easy and one offer accepted, closed. It's a little bit of a competitive playing field. So the fact that they are predicting that things might slow down a little bit, we're still in an extremely hot market compared to the rest of the United States. We're not expecting a slowdown of any real significance. And if anything, it's going to, hopefully, more inventory will come as new construction continues on. Building starts are still very strong. We'll keep seeing inventory increase, specifically when we get out of the seasonal. Usually the winter is just a slow time for real estate. But as we start to get into the spring and the summer markets, we'll have a little bit more inventory, therefore buyers will have a little bit more choice, and we won't see as crazy of multiple offer situations. It is absolutely not anything to be afraid of. That's the one thing that I always preface letting people know. Yeah, we're in a hot market. It is competitive. If you have the right players on your team, it's fine. Just go into it with the expectation that it is going to be a little bit of a fight and a battle, but it's just fine. At the end of the day, you'll always be able to get a home and the home that you want. It just takes a little bit of just finesse.
Absolutely, and it always helps to have somebody on your team that knows what they're doing.
Single most important thing,
Absolutely.
honestly.
Yeah. And so this next question we have is from Matt. It's from a viewer at home, and they were just wondering what neighborhoods specifically in Denver you would recommend for either an investment property or a first-time home buyer, or possibly both.
Yeah. So this is a tricky question, Peter, because, I mean, as you know, there's just so many variables that go into this. I mean, what is your price point? Also, what is your kind of threshold of staying in the unit? Is this something that, you plan to stay on for a couple years and then keep as a rental, or are you wanting to go for the equity upside? Also, how much of a tolerance do you have for maybe a fixer upper versus something that's a little bit more turnkey? Also, how much cash you're putting down can kind of weigh into these things. So there's a lot of variables. And I think one thing that, I've worked with you on a couple projects is understanding the situation of the investor. And then from there, when we have that criteria, we can kind of then say, okay, maybe here's the certain neighborhoods that kind of make the most sense. But, that inherently the neighborhoods that tend to get a little bit more outside of the Denver corridor can be cheaper. So when you get more into the more rural fringe of things and just kind of more into the residential homes and neighborhoods, those are always going to be a little bit cheaper of an entry. Like if you go get a 2-bedroom condo in the middle of Broomfield, it's going to be cheaper than something that's like right downtown or in the Highlands or something like that. So kind of to your question, I mean, just kind of speaking to myself, I bought a house in the 5 Points area 5 years ago, and I got it in a lot cheaper, but I knew that that neighborhood was still kind of up and coming and there was going to be a time horizon there. So I lived there for a little bit, and then I've just been renting it out. But I knew that specifically because I wanted to hold it. So it's been a nice rental for me, but the equity really has kind of been what's kind of built up. Whereas I could have threw a lot more money down and got something that was already a little more pre-established and paid for more to get something that was, closer to downtown or in the Highlands or something. But the equity upside wouldn't have been as nice. So, as your time goes on and these neighborhoods start to develop, that's really where you kind of got to do your homework. And that's one thing that I like to work on with clients, and same with you, Peter, because you're a business guy, where we kind of can look at, okay, what's the next neighborhood to pop? How much time do you have? Are you trying to stay here and have kids, or are you trying to just move out in a couple of years and keep it as a rental? Or whatever your kind of goal is. So it's a tough question to answer. There's always a lot of movement, but kind of the more further out from the Denver corridor you go, the cheaper it's going to be.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great insight. And I think, Matt and I, we've both seen that the northern Denver neighborhoods are definitely starting to explode in similar ways along the 25 corridor. So it definitely depends on a lot of factors, but there's a lot of growth going on in some different areas. So I want to transition into another question from a viewer at home, kind of along some similar lines. This viewer bought a house in Athmar Park, and they're wondering what are the best ways to invest in their property to increase value. What kind of fixer-upper things they can do. So why don't we ask Andrea what she thinks on that?
So the most important part in figuring out what is going to bring you the highest dollar for your renovation funds is figuring out what your goal for the property is. Are you planning to live there for the next 5 to 7 years? Are you planning to live there for 2 years and then turn around and rent it out? What I always tell people is the most important things when you're going to renovate a property is your kitchen, master bathroom, and landscaping. Those are really what you're going to have your best bet on your return for your investment. The big thing that I also recommend is when you are doing these renovations that you make sure that you're doing them very neutral, not super personalized. If your favorite color is pink, do not make your kitchen cabinets pink. Not everyone's going to love that. Plus the design's changed. I mean, I've been in this a decade and we've gone from the warm, mahogany cabinets to cherry to oak to gray to white. And so everything changes. And so as much as you can make your renovation neutral, beautiful, there's easy ways to keep it simple, but really very, very, very cost effective. The better off you're going to be in the future, because if you turn around and you resell it and 5 years ago when you did the kitchen, gray was in and it's not now, probably not the best use of your money. The other thing that's really important is just figuring out what your use for the property is. As I mentioned, you can go crazy on a kitchen renovation, but do you really want to do that on something that you might plan to rent out in 2 years? Tenants do not always love the property the way you do. So it's really just when I sit down and I talk to people, I talk about what their plans for the property are, what their budget is, what their expectation is coming out of that remodel and renovation. And then we really pick and choose what the important parts are. Some things people think are really, really going to get them their money back, never do. So having that conversation before they spend the money is really important.
Right. And to kind of piggyback on Andrea's points there, because those were all amazing points, I'd also just kind of throw in too, looking at what an ROI would be and not getting yourself too caught up into like a big permitted project. Sounds kind of dumb, but a lot of people like sunrooms, but those are historically some of the worst additions you can do, because a lot of people don't like sunrooms. You got to get permitted. You spend a lot of money building it out, and then when you go to sell it, somebody's first intention might be to rip that thing down. So to Andrea's point, don't always just kind of assume that what you like is what the market likes. And then also, if you're going to be there for a while, maybe what projects can you possibly do by yourself over the course of time? So there's a lot of easy DIY projects, and kind of in the world we're living in now, where there's a YouTube video for everything and there's an instruction for everything. I mean, you'd be kind of surprised about how easy these things are. You don't have to be some, DIY goober guy. You can be a normal person, and there's a lot of snap-in things that look really good. So it's not always about just buying the most expensive contractor and having him, do everything for you. There's a couple cost-effective things that have some good ROI that you can kind of do yourself. I mean, everybody can paint a wall and kind of refresh a couple things if you just put some time in. So just making sure you're not just jumping in and signing yourself up for these big renovations, especially as you get closer to selling something. I know a lot of times people just say, oh, we need to redo the bathroom or the kitchen, and they'll go dump 20 grand into it. And then somebody, they'll rip out one thing that's kind of common now is the freestanding tubs. That's kind of all the rage right now. And so a lot of people that have these older homes kind of have the built-in tub that has the tile around it, and it's like a jetted tub. They want to do these big projects where they rip those things out and put in this nice, trendy, freestanding tub. And they spend a lot of money doing that, and then they really don't get the same ROI. So just making sure that before you sign yourself up for these, you kind of run the numbers, assess kind of the risk, and make sure that you're not losing money on doing these.
Yeah, no, that's really good insight. And I actually have kind of a segue question, and this is for Andrea. It's sort of a two-parter that will involve Peter and Matt in as well. But to start, with all of the COVID, that happened this year, I guess, we've seen modern technology kind of play a huge role in how real estate agents are able to do their business. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you've seen modern technology, change the real estate industry, and how you expect these to kind of stick around?
Absolutely. So it's funny to think about, but when I first started in real estate, we didn't even have electronic contracts. It was print and scan. And I feel like I'm 85 years old saying that, but that was where the industry was 10 years ago. So you print your contract, you have to bring it to somebody, ink it, and on. We've evolved quite a bit. We have the electronic contracts, which thankfully we had, prior to COVID, but it's been really fun to watch how we've shifted as an industry. A lot of people panicked. That I remember the day that basically we were told we can't do showings. It was like, what are we going to do? How are we going to sell houses? Thankfully, that only lasted a couple days, and we were able to carry on with that essential business. But we have been adopting a lot of really interesting technology. So one of the things that's very cool is Matterport. A Matterport tour is a 3D tour. It's kind of like Google Earth, but inside the house. You can toggle from room to room, and you can literally walk that house. You can toggle up, you can see the ceiling, you can go down, you can see what type of floor, you can go to the walls and just kind of walk through it. It also has a really awesome 3D feature where you can zoom out and you can look at the kind of dollhouse view of the house. I found that to be extremely beneficial, especially working with clients who are maybe immunocompromised or elderly and are not comfortable going out and seeing the house. It's a really good way to rule out different homes before we have to actually meet in person. Of course, thankfully, we have video. So a lot of my clients that have not necessarily wanted to go out, FaceTime. Like FaceTime has proved to be an extremely necessary tool in our business. And then I would say, and I'll let Matt talk about this, but we have access to a really awesome app called Yaza, which has kind of married everything that we've been lacking in real estate into being able to sell homes from far away, or to people who are in different states or cannot leave the house for whatever reason or are quarantined. Matt, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. So kind of to re-elaborate on what Andrea said, we kind of had some connections with a tech company that built an app that's actually directed towards realtors, not towards the consumer. So it's not like a Zillow or Redfin. It's really for realtors to help them do their jobs more effectively without having the presence of the client right there with them. So not only COVID, but I think Andrea brought up a good point with the relocation. A lot of people are moving out of certain cities, especially now with a lot of the work from home. They don't necessarily need to be binded to a physical place. And so they're kind of moving to Denver as maybe a cheaper alternative or a place that's more desirable that they want to live at. So how do you sell a home to somebody that lives in Texas? Well, these technologies, not only the pictures on the MLS, but we all know sometimes a room looks great in the pictures and then it's 10 times smaller than you think. But then the Matterport that Andrea talked about, which, Peter actually does himself, and those are great too. But what's kind of that final piece that can really kind of give you that human element and then also allow you as a broker to do your job. And that's kind of what this Yaza app does. It's kind of like shooting a video, but then you can put your own kind of puts and takes on things. So if you're working with a client that, likes built-in cabinets, then you can kind of highlight those in the home, whereas maybe the pictures don't do enough of a job on the MLS listing. So it's a great tool for that. And it's also not just something that's in the short term because of COVID. It's something that going forward, we're seeing a demographic kind of shift where you have kind of more of the millennials and the Gen Zers now coming into the market, and some of the baby boomer generation that's kind of moving out. So what do the younger kids want? Oh, they want the technology. They're more used to doing the FaceTime. They're more used to looking at things using their phone. So Yaza is really a nice tool that we foresee even getting better over time and having even more people adopt it. So technology has been a big thing. I mean, our firm has done a lot of work in the last year to kind of modernize kind of our tech suite. And historically, real estate has kind of had an older feel to it. We do a lot of things historically, and there's still a lot of like old, outdated systems where if you work in like tech or other industries, those things would have been gone 15 years ago. So we're now starting to see real estate kind of adopt those new technologies, and it just kind of helps streamline a lot of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis.
And it's interesting because Peter and I have been talking a lot about these kinds of technologies as we were, planning this agenda and the panel discussion. And I want to let Peter kind of elaborate about the Matterport stuff because it is just so fascinating. And I'm sure too, it's a really great tool for people watching at home to kind of start the process of looking at homes kind of around the area without having to commit to like an actual showing where you're seeing a broker and whatnot. So Peter, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Matt mentioned, I have started a Matterport service provider of my own, where I'm the provider for the Price & Co listings. And so I am a real believer in these technologies, not only during these times, but moving forward as part of, that younger demographic coming into the home buying process. I just see so much value in being able to click around and see and get a feel for a home before having to go and do a showing. And I just think that, as the younger generation of home buyers enters the market, it's just going to continue to explode. And these awesome applications like Matterport and Yaza. And I previously worked in commercial real estate. And so I kind of got the feel of, teaching an old dog new tricks. It's hard to get people to adopt to these new technologies, but as everything progresses, they're only going to get more and more important. And so we at Price & Co try to be ahead of those trends and provide those for our clients.
Awesome. Thanks for explaining that.
I guess I can launch this next question over to Mike. It's regarding mortgage interest rates. And so this is a question from somebody at home. Mortgage interest rates are very low right now. They're around 2.8%, and experts predict that they will stay low through 2021. For those who aren't familiar with real estate, what is the significance of the interest rates being this low?
Yeah, good question. I think in general, it just means to better affordability and lower monthly payments. And I'll give you some historical perspective there, because we've seen rates come down substantially, one with the pandemic, but they were on their way down before the pandemic hit. And so in just over 2 years ago, in November of 2018, we were at an 8-year high for interest rates. They were around 5%. And so on a $400,000 loan at that time, that monthly mortgage payment, principal and interest only, would have been about $2,147. 2019 was the biggest rally in the bond market at that time since 2011, and they came back down to around 4. So at 4%, that same loan amount, where at 5 it was 2147, at 4% it's now 1909. And now with them pushing to these historically low points, and as Matt mentioned earlier, I mean, we're talking 50-year lows for interest rates. That same $400,000 loan at 3% would be $1,686 in a monthly payment. So we're talking between a $400 and $500 difference in monthly payment from 2 years ago to today at that loan amount of $400,000. So it's just, I mean, once again, to summarize, it's allowed people to stay within their budget much more and keep their loan comfortable. Or as we've seen housing prices rise, they've been able to level up their home search and get a home that they want to be in for the much longer term without necessarily sacrificing on their budget or their lifestyle.
Absolutely. And we have another question from a viewer at home involving that, and they ask, with a 2.65% interest rate, is it worth paying extra toward their mortgage or using that money to do home improvements that would increase the value of their property?
I mean, first off, kudos to you. That's a killer interest rate. And you know, I'm gonna kind of dance around that and take a diplomatic and kind of financially minded approach in answering that, because I think it just depends. It was a similar question to what Andrea was asked earlier about, like, well, what makes the most sense in terms of home improvements or not doing home improvements. And so I think, you know, with anything, financial people think you should take a diversified approach. And so if you're paying down your mortgage, you're paying additional on your mortgage so that it goes towards principal at a rate of 2.625, you can almost think of that as being invested in a bond fund at that same rate of return of 2.625%. And so I guess my question back would be, are there other investments out there that might be able to yield a better rate of return? Because there's this opportunity cost, and what that means is, well, if you pay that extra $200 a month towards your mortgage, could that $200 a month be invested elsewhere that would yield a better return and build you more wealth in the long term? And then on the flip side of that question, and I'm just gonna kick this back to the real estate agents, as Andrea said earlier, when you're looking at those home improvements, you should really consult with them on your plan and what you want to do before making any decisions to see what your best ROI is going to be. I think given the 2.625 versus potential home improvement and appreciation, my gut would tell me that maybe the home improvement would make more sense over paying down the loan faster. But I don't think that there's just one cut and dry answer for everyone out there.
Yeah, and Mike, to touch on that too, again, we don't want to like dance around because we don't know, but it really just depends on what your situation is. Because, you know, to Mike's point, like, is it worth you know, putting a little bit more money down each month? Well, I don't know. Do you have a student loan that has an interest rate that's above the interest rate you're paying on your house? Like, there's kind of like other debts that if you're servicing that have higher interest rates, like credit cards that traditionally have a lot higher, then maybe it's more advantageous to pay those off. You know, again, the time horizon of where you're going to stay. Are you staying in this house for 10 years? Well, then don't redo the bathroom right now, because in 10 years, it can be out of style and you have to pay more money. So, you know, that's why it's a hard question to answer. And it really just kind of takes us sitting down and trying to figure out what your goals are for us to kind of help provide you maybe what a strategy would be for you. But otherwise, I agree with Mike 100% on everything.
Absolutely. Great points, Matt.
Was there a question that came up there, Gertie, that we wanted to tackle?
Yeah, we did have a question from someone watching at home. So this is, what's the recommended debt/income ratio for someone looking to buy a house and understanding the mortgage they qualify for?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and field that one just because I think it's mostly revolving the mortgage topic.
Yeah.
For those viewers at home that are curious to know what debt to income ratio means, that is basically your monthly obligations as we would see them on your credit report. So car payment, student loan payment, credit card payments, and the new mortgage payment divided by your gross monthly income. And so that's important, is that it's gross versus net and after tax and take home. And so I can tell you, Sarah, my answer is, well, it depends on every person. Just like we talked about with the last question, it depends. Because I don't necessarily, when I take a loan application, that is a question that I would ask you is, hey, well, one, what are you paying currently per month? So that we kind of already have a barometer that if you're paying $2,000 a month, how comfortable is that already? And based on that, what would be your comfort level on the range for the monthly mortgage payment, or the maximum that you don't want to go above, in determining where you're most comfortable? Because while I see what's on someone's credit report, and that's what we use to calculate a debt to income ratio, everyone likes to spend their money differently. We all have our own plans for traveling or going out to dinner or other leisure activities. And I don't look at that stuff on a bank statement. And so that's kind of where it does come down to a little bit of just kind of understanding your own budget. But I can tell you, like, what we can get people qualified up to on a debt to income ratio. And I think a lot of times this blows people's mind, because usually it is in that range of 45 to 50% of the gross monthly income. And that's that total debt ratio. So all those monthly payments I mentioned earlier, the car, the student loans, the mortgage payment. So I don't know if that helps, and everyone else feel free to chime in, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of color there.
Thanks, Mike. This is a question that, I've kind of heard you guys talk about how it's a seller's market. For those of us, us novices, what does that mean? And, why should we potentially choose a buyer's agent for that instead?
I can field that one. Well, as Andrea mentioned, the seller's market just means that there is a lot of competition for homes, but that does not mean that it is out of the realm of possibility. And that is where a buyer's agent can really benefit you. Having someone that knows the process, knows how to approach other agents, and knows how to negotiate for you and your best interest is very important, especially in a seller's market. And so, we've seen houses that are, going for over asking by like, $20,000. But, it helps to have somebody who can go in with a knowledge of real estate and say, okay, well, these things aren't exactly right. And then, as you get into the transaction, you can start figuring out compensation and just make sure that you get the best deal possible.
Yeah, I think to touch on that as well, I mean, one thing that gets overlooked or maybe to somebody that's not in the industry is it's not always about the price. Like, yes, that's obviously the biggest kind of thing and every seller wants to sell it for the most money, but there's a lot of other things that kind of go involved in a real estate transaction that aren't exactly monetary. So you kind of need to have a seasoned broker that understands kind of the lay of the land. I would say as an expert negotiator, somebody that can think about, what is the selling points to the seller? Is it just they just need the cash? Or is it somebody that, wants to have a smooth transaction? Maybe it's somebody that is pretty wealthy and they're selling an investment home and they just want to make sure the deal is going to go through. Maybe they need some additional time horizons. So really what a good broker should do is kind of approach things with a lens of like, what kind of leverage do we have? But then also if it's in the seller's market, and our leverage is a little bit thin on the buy side, what is the seller looking for? And then from there, we can kind of tweak our offers and kind of advise on like what the best strategies would be when it comes to writing a contract. And so when you have a seasoned broker that knows what they're doing, there's a lot of things you can do, such as like appraisal gaps, knowing which dates you can flex out or pull in without putting your buyers at risk for the transaction, maybe advising on some additional money to put down or whatever it would be. So like to Peter's point, if all of a sudden we already know that the market has been yielding higher prices and we can do like a CMA and do our own analysis of what a property would be worth, and we know that this thing's probably going to close for 20K higher, well, then we're not going to really waste our time by putting a offer in that's either low ball or at price, because if 10 other offers come in and we know that 5 of those are already going to be over, well, then we're already out of the ballpark and then you're screwed. So a lot of times it's just establishing a relationship with the other broker, seeing what kind of info you can get before you actually write up an offer, and then kind of knowing what puts and takes are in there to put your client in the best position to get accepted.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. So we've got about 15 minutes left and we've got so many questions that you guys have submitted. So I'm going to put kind of rapid fire some of them up on the screen. This one, and feel free to jump in, any of you. Do you see most first-time home buyers coming to the table with a down payment or needing assistance in qualifying for FHA loans versus conventional loans?
Good question. So yes, we see that. And good thing for us here in Colorado is we've got great programs. We've got a state program, which is the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, also referred to as CHAFA. That is offered statewide for down payment assistance and first-time home buying. Alternatively, the Denver metro market, we have a program called Denver Metro DPA. And both are great. They've kind of got their pros and cons either way. And otherwise, the down payment requirement, it's no longer 10 or 20%. You can get a great conventional or FHA loan at 3 or 3.5% down. So I think it's, once again, figuring out, because sometimes the down payment assistance options, they do come at a trade-off of maybe a higher interest rate, or it's a second mortgage you have to pay back. So I think it's just looking at those considerations out of the gate and over time, and what your plan is for the home, and seeing if that's the right fit.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm going to put another one up right now. What percentage of down payment should you aim for as a first-time home buyer? Sorry, this one's a little bit misworded.
Same thing, but I do think if I had to make a recommendation, I think it does depend on people's situation. I think it also depends on, if you are paying exorbitant rent and a down payment assistance program gets you out of that and into the market faster, it's almost like investing in a 401k that you've got compounding returns over time. And so in certain situations, you want to get into the market rather than later by saving up a down payment. So I think that's just something we look at, that do you look at the down payment assistance, or if you can get to the 3% down, that's usually my recommendation. And then you do get a slight break on the interest rate by getting to 5% down. And so if I had to generalize, and once again, I would provide unique advice for everyone out there, but if I had to generalize, I would say 3 to 5% if possible.
Awesome. And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think, it's a unique case. So how does the debt income ratio work when you're looking to purchase an investment property? Does future rental income get factored in when taking out a second mortgage?
Yeah, great question, Laura. Do you guys mind if I keep going? Cool. So when you're buying an investment property, our appraiser will provide a market rent analysis and an operating income statement as part of that appraisal. Let's say the appraiser says that home is going to rent for $2,400 a month. We will take 75% of that rental income in the appraiser's eyes to offset your monthly mortgage payment. So you don't necessarily, if you own another home, you aren't necessarily having to qualify for your full mortgage payment on the home, that your primary residence, and the full mortgage payment on the investment property. It's really just a portion on the investment property plus your primary residence. And the same thing would go for if you're converting a primary residence to a rental property. So say you own your home and you're like, this is in a great area, similar to what Matt did, and he turned that into an investment. But when you go to buy that next primary, if you have leases in place on your old primary, we take 75% of the lease agreements to offset that monthly mortgage payment. So now you're really just qualifying for the new monthly mortgage, and then any positive or negative cash flow from those lease agreements at 75% on the old home. Now, I'll touch on a second home, which is also a vacation property. That is the only case typically where you don't get to use any potential rental income. Vacation property, you have uninhibited access to year round. You get to go to your ski condo and use it whenever you want. Then you're qualifying for your primary residence home payment along with the secondary residence mortgage payment. Hope that helps, Laura.
Hey, Mike, can I ask a question for you? How would that play out if you had like an Airbnb and like a short-term rental situation?
Airbnb, because it's so new, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I would say, haven't fully adapted their guidelines in qualifying. Other than that, when you own an Airbnb, you get a 1099 at the end of the year for that rental income. So in our eyes, then it's considered self-employment. And typically the guidelines for self-employment is you need a 2-year history. And that's because self-employed, and this I think coincides with Airbnb, is there's variability to what that income can look like year in and year out. So we want to make sure that we're not just like, okay, 2019 was a killer year for Airbnb and you crushed it and made a ton of money. We're not just qualifying off that 1 year, because then when COVID hit and maybe Airbnbs were a little bit shaky, especially there early on, we want to make sure that it's averaged out and there's a more conservative approach when we're making sure someone has the ability to repay the loan.
I've got one more question. This is from Omari. So this is sort of like, should I use a financial gift as a down payment or towards a loan for a first-time home buyer?
It depends on the amount of the gift, Omari. I mean, I think I work with a lot of people who do get some family help. And I'll admit, I even took family help when I bought my first home. And it was I'm very fortunate to be in that position, but it was I guess use it or lose it and type deal that you feel bad, but you also, it's like, all right, well, does it really get me into that better financial position of qualifying or making my loan that much more cost effective and that much more affordable? And to that end, I think it's just something that you look at and we factor in that, okay, maybe it's there. But it's all about understanding the numbers first. And so if that down payment comes to be $15,000 or $20,000, we have that discussion first. And then you've got the ammunition to talk to any potential gift donors. What your down payment assistance option looks like versus the amount with the gift. And sometimes people take a gift and then they pay it back over time too. And this would be similar to like if you took a loan out on your 401k. Does that loan that you're taking, I guess, is it a net cash positive thing that you're doing there? Like, is that additional down payment bettering your monthly payment even with that payback of the loan, if that makes sense?
Yep. Actually, Mike, I got one question on that too. So you touched upon family being the giftor. What if it's a close friend or a step parent? How does that kind of impact that situation?
Good
Sorry
question.
for putting you on the spot.
Technically, on a conventional loan, the gift donor has to be related by blood or marriage and fiancés count. What we have you do, and for underwriting, is you sign a gift letter with your donor. And we don't necessarily, like if there's someone who has two different last names and they say, this is my cousin or this is my fiance, kind of leave it at that. We're not looking for a picture of the wedding ring or a wedding invitation or anything like that. But Fannie Mae's guidelines do say related by blood or marriage. FHA has a different guideline. Well, it's got to be blood or marriage, but they don't allow fiancés, but they allow a close, long-standing friend, which is kind of a ambiguous guideline, I guess. And I've had some people who have like had childhood friends that they're, or like a godparent, for example, someone who's been invested in that person's life for a long time. That's just something I think we have to navigate on a case-by-case basis. But in general, if it's a relative, it's easy peasy.
Awesome. That's some good information. Well, I think we are pretty close to concluding, but before we wrap up, I just kind of wanted to go around and see if there are any, what is the best piece of advice that you guys could leave our viewers with? And why don't we just throw it over to Mike?
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, I feel like I'm on a roll here.
Absolutely.
So, I think my recommendation is there's a ton of information out there with the internet, but it's also very convoluted and doesn't necessarily apply to people's unique situations. So I would say it's better to just start the process, whether it's having that conversation with a real estate agent or having the conversation with a mortgage broker like myself or a financial planner, whoever it is that you know and trust, to get that process started. But start sooner rather than later, because we really have no agenda on if you're trying to buy in the next 90 days, the next 6 months, or the next 12 months. And it's, we like to keep it exciting and motivating. And my first step is always just a quick conversation of, hey, what's your goals and what are your current financial situation? And then from there, we're going to explore some numbers and options so you know what you're looking at and what are the levers you can pull. Mm-hmm. And of course, then there's more things like gathering documentation and going through underwriting and finding the home and all of that. But I've seen too many people who probably start the process late and then they're feeling stressed because they're under the gun of a lease deadline coming up. And then we got to move quickly, and then they're not buying the home that they want to buy. They're buying a home to buy. And so I think it just, if you have that information at hand earlier on, there's going to be a lot more confidence going through the process. And I'm not the type of person to say you're approved or denied. It's, hey, here's where we're at and here's where we can get, like, and here's how we can improve things if we want. Like, that's the other benefit of starting early, is we can help get people into the most optimal situation.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why we like working with you so much, is that you're always willing to work with people and figure out their best situation and never pushing anyone along. Andrea, do you have anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job of explaining where the market's at. It's competitive, it's hot, there's a lot of layers to it. So my biggest piece of advice to anybody looking at buying a home is find yourself a really amazing team. It really is true. It takes a village, and it can be a stressful process. And if you have a good team behind you, it's not. It's supposed to be fun. And if you find a really good buyer's agent that is able to explain what's happening at every step, and then if you find a really good lender and they have a good working relationship, all you really have to do is find the home you want, and then we do the rest of the work. So it's really, really, really important to have a good team backing you to have a successful and stress-free first-time home experience.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of touch on that as well and kind of go back to what Mike said, we really work with a lot of first-time home buyers. Just kind of our demographic of friends and stuff are people that aren't too old or they've had a lot of 30 years in a house. So a lot of the clients we work with are first-time home buyers and people that are just kind of taking off from their career or just getting out of college or whatnot. So we really enjoy this process. It should be fun. It should be exciting. There can be stressors just like anything in life, but I mean, that's what we are here for. That's our job. That's Mike's job. Like, we're here to basically lend our advice. And, at Price & Co. and I know at Megastar, we kind of operate in a family manner where we will never put anybody in a situation that we personally probably wouldn't do ourselves. So it doesn't hurt to just arm yourself with the information. So I think a lot of times to people that wait too long, they also just think like, oh, I don't have 20% down. I heard you need 20% down. So they start running the numbers in their head. But then to kind of what we touched on earlier is you really don't. So it's just come to us to have a conversation. And if, we can kind of help just give you a feel, and maybe you're not ready yet, but then now you know where you stand and where you need to be. So then in a year from now, start the process of working with us. Because if you start too late, then that's where the stressors come in, and then that's where like all that comes in. So if you just kind of already know what you're walking into, and then we'll always keep you in mind. And if you're looking for something and maybe something pops up in 8 months from now, and you said I'm going to wait for a year, but then we said, hey, look, this actually meets everything you need, and maybe we can get you into something. So it just behooves yourself to start early, arm yourself with the knowledge, and then know where you stand, whether you're ready or not.
Absolutely. I would just kind of top that off with just saying, don't be afraid to reach out. We're here to answer any questions you have, no matter where you are in the process. And so we are always happy to talk with you and figure out what the best strategy is for our clients.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys all so much for being great panelists and for joining this evening. This was a really informative Fireside panel, and I'm really grateful for all of the best practices and insights that you've shared with us and our community. We'll be sending out a recap email tomorrow with the live stream video link and our 5 takeaways from this conversation, so be sure to stay tuned. I'd like to give a big shout out to Peter Hurd for facilitating this incredible discussion and for being a great, great partner to work with. When Peter first came to us with this chat idea, we knew that it would be a really great way to kick off our 2021 programming. So thank you, Peter, for being a great leader in the community and presenting this information to everyone in a really clear and digestible way. Real estate can obviously be pretty daunting to get into, but the Price & Co. real estate team has given us really clear roadmap to make this process a lot more fun and a lot more approachable. That's all for me tonight, but if you have any questions for Peter or the Price & Co. real estate team, their contact information is linked on our website. Otherwise, have a great rest of your night, and we'll see you guys soon. Bye.